Welcome you all for this webinar, Weekend with Wisdom webinar with Yogashree Raghuram ji. It's an honor to have him here again and again. In fact, he has been one of our mentors from the beginning of our activities. As many of you know, Indica Yoga is a platform that aspires to offer authentic, immersive, transformative yoga experiences across the world. We deem that yoga needs to be very actively connected to all its important strings or roots. Yoga with Sanskrit, yoga with spirituality, yoga with Vedanta, yoga with Ayurveda. Only when we have this holistic vision, then the true essence and meaning of yoga will reveal in front of us. And all our activities are directed towards this end. Of the various initiatives that we have, currently we are having this Weekend with Wisdom. It's an opportunity to sit under the feet of a guru, a teacher, a master, someone of the stature of Sri Raghuram ji, and just allow us an opportunity to immerse in a particular subject or a topic. And today, on this occasion, we'll be having a glimpse of a very special text called Yoga Vasishtha. Yoga Vasishtha forms a very important text in the tradition of yoga. In fact, it also carries one of the most beautiful definitions of yoga, which Raghuram ji might be referring to. So I once again welcome you all, and also would like to welcome and introduce Raghuram ji. Namaste Raghuram ji. Thank you for joining us. As most of you know, Yogashree Raghuram ji is the chairman and spiritual founder of Yoga Bharati. Yoga Bharati has its operations activities both in India and US and also in many other parts of the world. He has been a student of yoga and spirituality quite from his younger days. Along with his engineering education, there was also another dimension where yoga was very close to him, and he started his studies and association with many great masters like Professor Shastri ji. And since then, he has devoted his life to a cause that he strongly believes in, the spread of holistic approach to yoga and spiritual knowledge all over the world. He has also been an international ambassador for Yes Vyasa, the organization which we are familiar with. It's also a university. So as their international ambassador, he has traveled across the world for last 3 decades and guiding seekers and researchers in the field of yoga. He is widely popular among his students, and he is known for his wit, wisdom, and generosity in his teachings. I can assure you that all the three has personified in his stature, and we'll get a taste of all these things even as we move along today. So with this brief introduction to Raghuramji, I request him to lead us from this point onwards. And I'd also would like to let all of you know what we are having today is just a glimpse, but we plan to have a course, a proper course on Yoga Vasishtha shortly. So the details will be announced later in a few weeks, but this is just a taster kind of an experience. And Raghuramji will lead us through this wonderful, delicious experience. Over to you, Raghuramji.
Namaste, Vinayji. It's very nice to be associated with this Indica Yoga. I see a lot of people joining, and I'm just so very happy that on a very strange subject like Yoga Vasishtha, people take interest and come to join. Let me give a few ideas about Yoga Vasishtha itself. Probably, I consider that people who have come to learn about Yoga Vasishtha are already familiar with Bhagavad Gita, familiar with other ideas of yoga in general. When I say yoga, it means yoga philosophy aspect of it. So therefore, I can relate that with Bhagavad Gita and this thing, in the sense that, there is a lot of parallel between Bhagavad Gita and Yoga Vasishtha. It is like this, that Gita was also a text between the teacher and student, and the student happens to be Arjuna, and the teacher is Krishna. And that was done in the battlefield, even though that before long, actually, Krishna and Arjuna knew each other about it, but only at that point of time that Krishna had to give Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. And that too in the battlefield, of not any other place. In fact, it was very strange, and then that was a question that had up my mind when I first started Bhagavad Gita. I said this has to be discussed in the forest, in the Gurukula atmosphere, and Pandavas were there in the forest for long years. And then Krishna, instead of teaching at that time, which will be beneficial for all the Pandavas and Draupadi, why did he choose in the battlefield? It is because that Arjuna needed that message at the battlefield. The same way that Krishna also, in Rama's case also, Vasistha was there. Rama was there at Vasistha's place and learning about various aspects of philosophy and life and all those things for Shodasha Muna Praya. That means to say 6.5 years that he was there with him. And as a student, he was there and then came back. After that, this particular teaching has happened between, again, Vasistha and Rama. Why did not Vasistha teach Rama earlier itself? That means to say the kind of need to teach this particular knowledge has not arisen. See, that means there are two types of knowledges. So one is the knowledge about the managing the material world outside in a dharmic way, of course. And second thing is the knowledge about some special knowledge about something which is about deep inside. And that seemed to be the way both Krishna and Arjuna and Rama needed this teaching at particular point of time where it was absolutely necessary. And there also that in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was a very nice person, very good, honest, sincere, and a very devoted person. But in spite of it, he required Bhagavad Gita, not Duryodhana. I mean, the wicked guy. That means basically somebody who is honest, good, moralistic, everything. And after that, then this Bhagavad Gita was necessary. That means to say, there is a need for a patrata, that means to say eligibility, and that eligibility is basically somebody who has all that kind of knowledge. Similarly, Rama was very nice, very good. In fact, a person with all the supposed to be the qualities. And after that, he required this particular Bhagavad Gita or Yoga Vasishtha lesson. That means this lesson is something which is a level where it is from a immoral to moral to the next level is the amoral. That's what is the spiritual level. And for that journey that the Yoga Vasishtha is taught. Another very important point that we could think of is that the whole of Bhagavad Gita was given when Arjuna wanted to run away from the battlefield. And he was in the case of despondency, he was in depression, and he was in anxiety. And at that level, all those symptoms were given by Arjuna in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita itself. My hands are shaking, legs are shaking, I'm blurred, I'm confused, I don't know what to do. These are the qualities that Arjuna refers to Krishna before the actual teaching of Krishna started. The same way, Rama's case also, he was like that. He was in the state of despondency. Very significant thing about that is Vishada, that means sadness or sorrow or melancholy, happens in everybody's life. There's nobody who does not have come across that kind of a situation where he is sad, depressed, melancholy, and he's in loss, that kind of thing. But very rarely anybody converts that into a journey into yoga. And that's what Arjuna did it. Therefore, the very first chapter of Bhagavad Gita is Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Vishada means sadness. And this is supposed to be Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Vishada is converted into yoga. And what is that because of which that Arjuna Vishada is different from others Vishada, or the solution Arjuna required is different from the other solutions? It is because whenever somebody goes through the sadness, Vishada problem, they try to find out the reason outside themselves. And that's what many of the philosophers have given. Try to give the solution for your sadness with the world outside. And that's what Karl Marx said. You're unhappy because a lot of people, they take advantage of you. The rich take advantage of the poor. That's why they're unhappy. The strong take advantage of the strength over the weak. Therefore, that they are unhappy. So therefore, basically, it is the situation outside. This is what is called as in Sanskrit, paristhiti janya. That means to say situation outside. Our materialistic philosophers, they try to say that, outside world is painful. Therefore, you are suffering. That's what is another way. In the Vedanta, it is called as vastu janya. Either paristhiti janya or vastu janya is the way that people have sadness. It is the first time that in the history of mankind that very clearly that Arjuna has given the idea that, look, I'm sad, I'm depressed, I'm in difficult situation. But please, Krishna, tell me what should I do? That means to say, he indicated that he needs to correct himself. It's a very important thing that I need to correct myself to come out of my situation of sadness. What is that I can do it? What is that I have to do in the world outside or change the world outside? That was not the question. The question is, what is that I need to change? In Rama's case also, that he was in that depression, but then at the same time that he wanted to come out of that situation by changing himself. And that is the reason why there is a very great similarity between Arjuna's Vishada Yoga in Bhagavad Gita and Rama's, the first chapter, what is called as the Vairagya Prakarana, where Rama throws his ideas about Vairagya that he has. Now, Arjuna, at least we could say that he had a problem because he is having his own people on either side, that they are fighting the war and they will be killed. That's how Arjuna starts the question. In fact, there, the opposite king, Dhritarashtra, says, my people and Pandavas, very clearly separate my people and my enemies. Whereas Arjuna on the other side says that everybody is mine, all my people on the other side. So, and therefore he had a grief saying that my people I'll be killing. So should I fight the war? So at least Arjuna had that kind of problem. In Rama's case, there was nothing like that. Rama, in fact, on the Vairagya Prakaranam, the introducing about Rama, his father, Dasharatha, says to Vishwamitra. Vishwamitra came to Dasharatha, the father of Rama, to take the help of Rama to please send Rama with me so that my yaga, yajna, whatever that is there being conducted by all these rishis, and that need to be protected. Why don't you please send Rama? That is the time when Vasishtha, Vishwamitra, his father, that is the Dasharatha says that, Rama, ever since he came back from the pilgrimage, that he was in depression. Ever since he came back from pilgrimage, it seems that he doesn't have a proper state of mind, composure of mind. And then he is alone and he lost his smile on his face, all these things that Dasharatha says. So therefore, basically, at least in Arjuna's case, that there is a reason to be depressed because his own people will be killed. The war field. War is something which really takes toll on a lot of people. When that is the situation, what is the case of Rama? Somebody can get into the depression in the case of when everything is all right. Yes, we have later on similar example is there in the historically. That's what is Buddha's case. Buddha also had everything. He was the only son of his family, his father, Shuddhodana. And then he had beautiful kingdom and every facility that was there, everything was there. All that what he heard from his friend Chinna was that, well, one day or the other we are going to die. And that question, that we are going to die, put him into such a situation that immediately he was a changed person. He went on his inquiry. So a very similar situation was there in the case of Buddha and also Rama. Rama also, everything was all right. And now look at the despondency of Rama. He says that I have no, I mean, life is going on with all kinds of things that are there. Everything is going on as the way. Day gets up and there are dances, there are this thing, wonderful dishes, nice things to eat. But that's all. I mean, I can't imagine anything which is more than what I have. So riches are there, kingdom is there, everything is there, wonderful parents are there. You know, when everything is there, it looks like that life becomes insipid. And he says that how many days I can think of, how many years I can think of living. It's all the same thing that's going to continue. There is nothing new, there is no novelty. What is this purpose of this life? I don't see any purpose in living. But then if I want to die, I see that I don't have any purpose in dying also, because death is not going to improve any situation. So therefore, Rama is the first person who says that I have no interest in living, I have no interest in death. And that was the situation Rama was. Seems life is settled and everything is going on like this. Now this is where Rama and Arjuna were in similar kind of situation. And whatever the teaching that was given the name of yoga for both of them, in the case of Arjuna, it was the whole of 700 shlokas of Bhagavad Gita. Whereas in the case of Rama, it is 36,000 shlokas that are there in Yoga Vasishtha. But at the end of all these 700 shlokas of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says to Krishna, very beautifully, saying that my hands are steady, legs are steady, can see clearly. Please tell me, what should I do? Rama, for that, Krishna replies to Arjuna saying that, hey, Arjuna, do whatever you want to do it. Yathechasi tatha kuru. When he says like that, Arjuna now sets to fight the war. That means basically the whole text of yoga not only takes him away from his depression, but it makes him proactive to fight the war. It not only helps him to come out of his physical weaknesses, but also he is mentally strong. He makes it to take a decision to fight the war. This transformation is what you can see, and that transformation is the one which made Arjuna to blow the conch shell, and the war started. He became proactive. And why Krishna had to make Arjuna to fight the war? Because basically the whole scheme of Arjuna is to see that, to establish dharma. In order to establish dharma, this war was necessary, which was almost like to the point where, in fact, before the war takes place, Krishna says to Kauravas, saying that, look, you are inviting the war, and Pandavas are on the dharma side, and you people are on the adharma side. Adharma has to be eliminated, dharma should be settled. Therefore, you are going to lose the war, Pandavas are going to win the war. So it is not Arjuna to win the war, it's not Pandavas to win the war. Krishna's interest is to see that he establishes dharma, and that is where basically we also say that after the Mahabharata war, after the Bhagavad Gita, then the new era started, and that's what is Kali Yuga, which is where with a new dharma set up and the world continued its journey. Whereas the same thing in the case of Rama also, very similar situation. What Vasishtha gives Rama, the teachings of whole of Yoga Vasishtha, all that is there. At the end of it, Rama prepares himself to go with Vishwamitra. Vishwamitra is a sage who approached Dasharatha to seek the help of Rama. And then Rama and Lakshmana, both of them accompany Vishwamitra, and that night when they slept, next morning when Rama was about to get up, at that point of time, Vishwamitra wakes him up with a beautiful shloka, waking up shloka, and that is Kausalya Supraja Rama Purva Sandhya Pravardate Uttishta Narashartula Kartavyam Daivamandikam. Hey Rama, we please get up, because what is that? You have a kartavya, you have an important task on your shoulders. And what is that? Daivamandikam Kartavyam. It is given by the divinity. That's what is the establishing of Dharma. Now that is what you could see. That journey Rama started after this Yoga Vasishtha. His journey, every step in that journey to establish Dharma, including the marriage that he had with the wife Sita, and that is the beginning of the whole journey. Because after acquiring all the weapons for warfare and all those things from the various forces that are there, I mean, that's how the Ramayana goes on. And afterwards, marrying Sita and then going to the forest and all that, you see how much that he has done to establish that particular Dharma aspect of it. So therefore, there is so much of similarity in this text of Bhagavad Gita and Ramayana. That's the reason Yoga Vasishtha. That's why Mahabharata war is very unique war, because there are no wars where a teaching of the nature of Bhagavad Gita has taken place. But similar to that is this Yoga Vasishtha, is an extraordinary, wonderful text. It does not make somebody to run away from the world. Highly spiritual text, but makes him a proactive, so that he can go to that. Proactive to the degree that he has to go to the forest and fight all the demons in the forest and re-establish Dharma. And that's why the whole text becomes very important. Now, another question that comes up about this text is, even Bhagavad Gita also, how can, when both the armies are waiting there, they were sitting and discussing, they were standing there in the middle of the war field, discussing about 700 shlokas of the whole of Bhagavad Gita? The simple answer that is, the conversation between Arjuna and Krishna might have gone a few minutes. But then by the time that you put all those things with all the explanation behind it, it came to 700 shlokas. In reality, what was conspired between Krishna and Arjuna were by the vision, not by the words, but by communication was beyond the words. Whereas by the time that you put them into the words, they are 700 shlokas. Whereas in Ramayana, between Rama and Vasishtha, the dialogue that goes on, 36,000 shlokas. Original Ramayana itself is 28,000 shlokas. It's much more than that. Often people wonder. That's one of the reasons many of the spiritual people also do not recognize Yoga Vasishtha as a very important text, because that there are so many stories that are involved. But in my view, as I read it, probably the way that discussion went on between Vasishtha and Rama were mainly about the principles that were there given by Vasishtha to Rama, explaining various main issues of the philosophy. But then by the time whoever may be the author who has written this Yoga Vasishtha, he tried to put together from various corners across the spiritual world, spiritual journey of this Indian subcontext, and that whatever the stories that were giving the similar kind of ideas, whether maybe the stories may be from Prahalada or the story may be from Gandhi or anything like that, they have included all those stories to convey the message. See, therefore, a message is always conveyed through anecdote. It stands much stronger with the individual. So therefore, all these various things are added later on. In my view, that original yoga discussion between Rama and then Vasishtha, the principles are something that is there, but it has been elaborated by all these stories. But even when they give the stories, the story aspect is much less, but the discussion, the principle that went on behind them is something which is profound, extraordinary. In fact, from the life of Prahlada, we just take an example. We might not hear, we only hear that Prahlada is one of the great saints who lived at that point of time or much before that. But then what happens is that we don't know what is the philosophy Prahlada actually discussed. But that essence of Prahlada's discussion of his philosophy that was there, at least you can get a glimpse of it in the Yoga Vasishtha. In that sense, Yoga Vasishtha becomes an important text there. The ideas of various aspects of yoga are given by Bhagavad Gita, Krishna. In fact, giving the background of yoga, that yoga has been there in this culture all the time. It's not that Krishna has invented or Vasishtha has invented, or much less Patanjali, much later say. Excuse me. But originally, the idea is that yoga has been always there in this culture. That's why in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that imam vam vivasvate prahuhu manivikshakave bhavet. This idea of yoga, I have given it to the sun before the whole creation has started. The idea is that one of the basic principles of this creation itself is yoga. Only thing is that all the other people, that they have put them into the writing, whatever that was there in the form of scriptures. So, particularly Patanjali has given the Yoga Sutras, that means to say basic formulae of yoga. But they have not created yoga. Similarly, by the time that Krishna has worked on yoga, that's why he gives Raj Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. So various kind of yogas that he has given. So that's why there are, but then they are not very clear watertight compartments of Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga and all that. But what happened was that he has given the whole of picture of yoga, of various different aspects of yoga. Later on, people have, Vivekananda is a person who gave very clear demarcation of Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raj Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, talks separately. So this is how all these various streams of yoga has come. But in Yoga Vasishtha, there's a very unique thing about it is that Vasishtha is not giving us any techniques of yoga per se. I mean, there are very, very few here and there, some hints about yoga, so, practice, but then it's not that way. Basically, the way that Yoga Vasishtha gives us is churning of your intellect, churning of your mind to see that how an intellect, so that you can go beyond to that quietude, that silence that Krishna wanted us or Vasishtha wanted us to get to, or that's what is the purpose of yoga, what we call it as Nirvana, what is called as Kaivalya, given by either Vasishtha or given by various other sages, Patanjali. And that is the hint that Yoga Vasishtha gives us all the time. So it is more of intellectually getting convinced about it, and not only that, intellectually getting convinced, but experiencing also out of that kind of an intellectual churning that goes on. That's why a lot of people call it as Jnana Vasishtha. That means it's not just only yoga ideas, but it is the way that you change the whole perspective of you so that you are in a different perspective. That's what is the Jnana Vasishtha. And this Patanjali also gives us, like for example, Patanjali, when he gives us about the practice sadhana mantra, sadhana pada, the second pada, in the beginning of the sadhana that he says, Kriya Yoga. That means to say, there is nothing much that you do in the name of Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga is an internal arrangement, and that is, karma is where the individual is involved, the kartru is involved. Where the moment kriya comes, that there is no kartru involved. That means you dissolve the kartru, the doer, and then the doing happens. I give you a small little example is that, when we take food, we select the food and we prepare the food and we put the food in the mouth. Until that time, it is what we do it. The kartru is involved, the doer is involved. Whereas Whereas what happens in the case of once you gulp the food inside and then it just goes inside, and it does so much of an activity inside where you are not there. Like the way food is pushed downwards, and then while passing through that, it is separated into what is useful, what is not useful. And what is useful has gone through the processes. And then whatever the food that raw that you have provided with the particular enzymes, then all those things are mixed. And then ultimately it makes the food into blood and then flesh and this and that. And whatever that is waste is eliminated. So much of an activity going on. In fact, of the whole activity that you look at it, picking up the food and putting it in the mouth is the least activity that you could think of. And that activity, we say that, yes, I'm eating. We give a great importance to I.
For lunch.
But then actually, there's a lot of activity going on inside without you being there. So therefore, this, when you look at it, in Sanskrit, we have a very beautiful word. Karma is what we do, the put your food in the mouth, whereas Kriya is what happens without your being there. The I not being there, whatever the activity we say, is what is Kriya. So therefore, when we say Kriya Yoga, eliminate the I doing aspect of it and let the doing be there, because that's how the nature is. You look at the nature, in the nature there is always activity going on without any I behind it. Wind blows where there is I, there is no I. Water flows, there is no I behind it. The moment water gets heated up at 100 degrees, it becomes water vapor, it becomes cloud, and then who makes it? There is no I behind it. Sun rises and sun sets and all that, there is no I behind it. And you look at it, so much of an activity where the I is not being there, and then activity is going on. So that means basically that I is the problem. And Patanjali also gives us the first beginning of the sadhana is a sadhana where there is not only the doing, but even the doer not being there. Of course, later on when he comes to samadhi, again he comes to the same point saying that the doer is dissolved. Tadevatramatrabhasam swarupa shunyam. Swarupa shunyam is the doer being not there. The whole of Yoga Vasishtha, therefore, is a huge text where there is not like that you are doing, but then the changing the perspective that you need to make. And particularly the way that the knowledge has been compared to the light, and the same way that Yoga Vasishtha is the one which fits into that example, because when there is darkness and then when the moment the light comes in, everything becomes open in front of you. It is very, that's why it is called as for a person who is sleeping to waking up. It's just same way that a text for direct awakening is what is Yoga Vasishtha. And a number of examples he has given in such a way that how this awakening has taken place in the case of these great saints, whether it may be Bali, or whether it is Prahlada, or whether it is Gadhi, or any of these examples that are there in Yoga Vasishtha. You see that this kind of thing that is there. This is the background, this idea that we look at, the Yoga Vasishtha text. It will be an extraordinary, wonderful thing. Now, this whole Yoga Vasishtha is divided into various chapters. First thing is the Vairagya Prakaranam, and second thing is Vairagya means basically Vitaragaha. Raga not being there. That means attachment not being there. Raga is attraction. Attraction, repulsion, both these things. Not only that, we always, in Vedanta, it's always referred, Raga, along with all the different, 6 different kind of attachments with that, Raga, Dvesha, and various other things that are there. All those things not being there is Vairagya. That means object is there and you are there, that's all. And suddenly that you feel that you are lonely amongst the whole thing. And this is what is The raga dropping down is Vairagya, and first one is the Vairagya Prakarana. And then when Vairagya happens, one can easily get into depression. And that's what in Rama's case, he went into despondency, went into depression. But then what happens is that giving a direction to that depression, not going towards that, but to see that how you can go to something which is beyond the birth and death, beyond the life and all that. And that's what is called as moksha. And moksha is the freedom. And that is the simple thing. That is what is the next prakarana, which is called as mumuksha prakarana. Mumuksha means basically the freedom, moksha. And your desire to go towards moksha is what is called as mumukshutva. Desire to go towards the freedom. Yes, this is a wonderful occasion when we have no raga, no attachment. It's a wonderful occasion to convert that situation of having no attachment, to convert into see that a total freedom inside, mukti inside, and that is what is mumukshutva. This mukshatva becomes a very, very important, huge prakarana that is there. And third one is the utpatti prakarana. Now, in utpatti prakarana, very similar to, this is like how the creation has taken place, how the manifestation has taken place. And that has been discussed with this. Now, compared to this utpatti prakarana, is in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, he gives us in the first chapter, Samadhipada, he gives us the idea of what is the Samadhi, what are the various states of Samadhi that's there within us. Inherently that we have those conditions within us, Samadhana Sthiti. That's why the first one is that Samadhi Prakarana. But then how to reach that, or what are the things which are coming in our way, which I need to really make a adjustment, and that's what is Sadhana Krama. After that, immediately we have what is called as Vibhuti Prakarana. In Yoga Vasishtha, in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, we have this Vibhuti Prakarana. Vibhuti means how the manifestation has taken place, how the various powers have come into that being. And this power being there is what is called as Vibhuti. Unfortunately, a lot of people put that Vibhuti as something which is diversions or which is the negative kind of thing. It's not the negative idea when Patanjali gives us. It's the idea that all this creation, what is the principle behind it? And a person who does the sadhana, who reaches that state, is also equipped with that kind of a situation. And that is where one has to be careful. That is why yoga for power against yoga for peace. Yoga for power can corrupt. Yoga for peace can never corrupt us. Yoga for power might entice us. And that's why we have seen such great yogis in the parampara. They are extraordinary, wonderful yogis, but then they had powers. And the moment that they had powers, the powers corrupt them. Greatest of the yogis that we have in front of us, the idea that we have, is the yogi called as Ravan. Ravan, a great yogi, but then look at what happened. All his powers corrupted him. So many sages that you see, Bhrigu, he had a great power. But then he used it for negative purposes. So there are people who have gone this power, who have passed through the practice of yoga and all these various aspects of samadhi, but at the same time, they went towards power that corrupted. And that's what is Utpatti Prakarana, is something about that kind of how the creation takes place. In a word, actually gives us the various ideas about a sage is like getting that kind of power. And that's why we have such examples like Bhushundu Upakhyanam or the various other Upakhyana. These are the things which will give us the idea that how a sage can get that power. And then the next one is the Sthiti Prakarana. Sthiti Prakarana is a chapter which is about the creation as an onlooker when you look at it. Sthiti means basically the way that you are. This is like the way that, when you take a wheel, when you go to the periphery of the wheel, it is constantly moving. It's rotating. It's constantly working. But then wheel is working because that it has at the center, there is what is called as the the core. And the core of the center is something which is not moving, axle, which does not move. When you take a circle also, the center is that which has no dimension. It is defined as that. The same way that the axle is something which is not moving. Every moving has at the background this non-moving that is there. So the movement is there, and the non-moving, it is based on that non-moving is the thing that is movement is taking place, and non-moving is something which is behind it. And the non-moving does not even disturb what is called as the movement that is there outside. Not only that, whatever that is supposed to be non-moving should not interfere with the movement. Should not interfere with the movement. If the axle starts interfering with this, with the wheel, then the wheel cannot go. When does the interference come? When you really want to stop it, when you apply the brakes on that, then only that you do it. But other than that, this state of being that is there in the background, and that's what is supposed to be sthiti. So sthiti prakarana is the next one, which talks about that state where it is at the background, it's like a witness, it's like the onlooker, sakshi, and looking at the whole thing, activity that's going on. And that is what is the sthiti prakarana. And the last one is the nirvana prakarana. Nirvana prakarana has two different aspects of it. One is called as the purva nirvana and the other is uttar nirvana. But many times that even this division is not there, it's all nirvana. This word called nirvana, there is one Upanishad itself is there in the name of Nirvana Prakara, Nirvana Upanishad. It's a very beautiful Upanishad. And Buddhistic philosophy also uses this nirvana very seldom. And what is the idea of nirvana? It is like the way that when the flame is extinguished, what is that state is supposed to be nirvana. That's what is a simple example of that. When the dissolution takes place, what happened to dissolution? What happened to the world when the dissolution takes place? The world goes back its origin. Like the way when you put off the flame of the fire of the candle, what happened to that fire? Where did it go? It goes back into the candle, because the moment that once again you light the candle, the fire comes back out of that candle. The same way that Nirvana Prakaranam is the state where the whole thing dissolves and then re-emerges to the whole thing. And this is how the dissolution is what is called as the Purva Prakarana, and then Uttara Prakarana is the way that the manifestation takes place. The whole idea is what Vasistha gives Rama, gives what happens at the individual level, so that individual gets motivated to sadhana, and also what happens in the world outside. That's what is at the Veshti level and at the Samishti level. In both the cases, how the things happen, that's what is given by Yoga Vasishtha. So it's a wonderful text, like the way that even similar to this idea is very similar to Mandukya Upanishad. When Mandukya Upanishad says that I am Atma Brahma, that means he shows I am this Brahman, where he compares that the individual I, whatever that is the stages that he goes through, and very parallelly that he brought about the external world outside in the form of various states, like for example Vaishvanara, Taijasa. These are the things which he talks about the external world. And then an internal world that we have the Jagrata, Swapna, Sushupti, how these two things are parallelly brought about. Whereas in Yoga Vasishtha also, Vasishtha gives Rama the whole idea of about what is there going on inside and what about the outside. Both these things are presented here in Yoga Vasishtha. So generally, this is the whole background of Yoga Vasishtha, general picture of Yoga Vasishtha. Now let me give you the sutras, which are not all the sutras, because as I said, 36,000 sutras. Even any smaller Yoga Vasishtha you take it, it has got minimum of About 10,000 to 20,000 10,000 sutras are there. But then there is another thing which is called as the essence of Yoga Vasishtha, which is a smaller one, version of it. Even that has got more than about 700-800 sutras that are there. Anyway, that helps us to get at least the idea of whatever that is there behind the whole thing. दिवि भूमौ तथाकाशे बहिरन्तश्च मे विभुः यो विभात्यवभासात्मा tasmai sarvatmane namaha. Our salutations to the divine and who is all pervading. And he shines as the light of perception, illuminating the earth, sky, and intervening space. My inner self and the outer world, and which manifest all these that exist. That one which is all pervading everything, not only the manifest, unmanifest, and beyond. All that is something which is supposed to be the divinity, and my salutations to that particular divinity and who is all pervading. There are three different aspects of it. One is the gross, and the other is behind is the unmanifest. And then behind that, there is another thing which is a further deeper unmanifest. How is that there are three different levels of unmanifest that is there? Two different levels of, apart from the manifest? Because the whole rest of the world considers, first of all, they consider only the manifest, cogito ergo sum. That's what is the idea that Rene Descartes has given. What we cognize exists, what we don't cognize does not exist. That is the idea. But then later on, much later, that they came to accept something what is non-existing, what is also there. It has yet not come to the existence, but it is in that direction. It's like the way that the child is there in the mother's womb, not yet come outside. But even before the child come into the mother's womb, in mother's womb, it smells like a small little speck, and that grows itself into a big human being. So that means to say that small little entity that is there in the mother's womb has got the whole picture of human being, and all the details are there. Therefore, as the child grows, brings about all that kind of details of it. Not only the physical details, but many times you see that the children, they resemble the parents so much. Not just one generation, 5, 6 generations, that particular may say goes. Not only that, you see that today we have such examples where the child is born with a prodigical talent of music or dance or whatever it is, and then where does it come from? Somebody should go through almost like several decades to learn that kind of thing, and that comes out in the child when so early, 6, 7-year-old can develop that kind of a knowledge. Caroline is one who has such a music talent of violin. Young girl, she hardly 7, 8-year-old, but you can see the way that she sings and dances, she plays and dances and all that. It looks so extraordinary. And where is that knowledge coming from? It has come from that small little seed that was there in the mother's womb. And that seed, how does it have it? It is in the form of unmanifest way. But then it is already decided what it's going to become, if it is going to become. So therefore, basically, we have what is called as the manifest, and then there's unmanifest. So these two can people easily accept it. World can accept it. Science will accept it. But what is much more important thing is the Indian philosophy says that this manifest and unmanifest, both these things come from the same thing, source. And what is that source? And that source be something which is much deeper unmanifest that is there, where even this possibility is also not there, or a possibility is also not fixed, which means to say infinite amount of possibilities. When we think of that infinite amount of possibilities from which all these things have come, that's what we are. very happy note about that is that you are also from that infinite possibility. I am also from that infinite possibility. The whole creation is from that infinite possibilities. And he says that that infinite possibility out of which that I have come, I have borrowed my preferences and came here. And that is the reason why I offer my salutations to that, my respects to that. Please understand that this is what is the idea of Brahman. This is the idea from the universal consciousness from which everything has come. This, the crux of Indian philosophy, always said that there cannot be no two sources for this universe. No two sources. There can be only one source. Good is from one source and bad is from another source. No, everything is from the same source. And that one source is something which I offer my respects. That's what is the sutra that comes in the second sutra in the first chapter. Extraordinary, wonderful wisdom the Indian philosophy says. So, therefore, what happens is that in your perception, this is something good, this is something bad. It is very local perception. Whereas you expand your perception, you see that there is nothing like bad and good. There is nothing like poles of opposite. In fact, there is one sutra where later on I will be able to explain about that, which directly talks about this aspect of it, saying that the silence that is there, shunya, the nothing is there. There's one nothing, there is a second nothing, and then there's a deeper third nothing. These three nothings are there. That he calls it as shunya, antashunya, bahishunya. Dvabhyam shunya taram vidhi, something which is beyond these two shunyas. Now, what happens is that, as I said, that this idea that I am is somebody who is there already programmed to become what when I grow up, when I become like that. If that's what is the way, in every seed, the whole plant is there, the whole mangoes are there, the whole fruits are there, everything is there. But whatever that is there inside the seed, and also every seed has a potential to manifest all that is there. All that what is required is an ambience. Once that ambience is given, it can manifest. But if the ambience is not given, that situation is not given, environment is not given, then the seed, the plant that is there inside the seed will not manifest. It does not come to the manifestation. So unmanifest level it is there, but it can manifest or it may not manifest. But otherwise, potentially that is there. But then potentially it is there always and already programmed in a particular direction. Like the way one particular variety of mango seed can only give that variety of mango fruits. And all that is programmed. It is not different from that. Whereas a real freedom is the freedom from that programming that is there. So when we say it is programmed, that means to say, I am bound. That is the bondage. This is what is the sutra that he says that aham baddho vimuktasya syamitis yasyati nischyaha natyantamagno metagnaha so asmiti shastre adhikaravato. He is qualified to read the scripture who has the resolve. I am bound and by various limitations, and then I want to be liberated. Such a person is a person that who is now running for this. This is what I said in the beginning, that the direction for which that Yoga Vasishtha gives us the idea that we want to get liberated from this bondage that is there. And this bondage also, it is not just only superficial. It slowly percolates into deeper system. And that is what we get it as Vasana or Samskara. Now, how this bondage has become Vasana or Samskara? When we are interacting with the world outside, when we are in relation with the world outside, what happens is that a few interactions will make us familiar with that. The familiarity brings about that. And this familiarity is the one which drives us into habit. Like, for example, I never knew as a child what is called as coffee or tea. But then as we grow up, We came across this drink, and then in the beginning, it may be really very bitter. I don't want it. But then once you get used to it, then we have it. Not only that we have it, then we look for that. By the time that we look for that, that means to say we are already habituated to that. We are not yet habituated to that, but then we are finding to fill our emptiness with that. Let's put it much more milder way. But then slowly what happens, it becomes like a habit. Familiarity brings about freely going towards that, and then freely going towards that slowly becomes like a habit. What is the difference between the habit? What is the difference between freely going towards that habit is that when it becomes habit, if you do not cater to that habit, you feel restlessness. You are not very comfortable with that. That's what many people, when they get up in the morning, when they don't have the cup of coffee or tea, they feel that something is missing in life. Something is restless. They were full. There is nothing missing in life. But then how it enters into us in the form of something missing. But then over a period of time, it goes so deep into us, you cater to that need, you cater to that hanker, that desire, that wanting. It becomes habit. When you cater to the, and then when it becomes habit, then you miss it. You do not, you are looking for it, and you can go any length to see that how you can get it. So these are all mean basically that you are bound by the habit that you have got. But then habit further percolates into physiology. And that is what in the Indian philosophy calls it as vasana. Vasana are the habits which are percolate into physiology. What are the kind of vasana? The vasana that percolate into physiology is like the way that coffee is there, chai is there. If I don't get that chai in the morning, then I feel constipated. That means to say it is interfering with my physiology. Or some people say that when I take that, I don't fall asleep. Sleep falling is something which is very natural. And then you don't fall asleep because you take it. For next 5-6 hours, you don't fall asleep. That means that food, that item that is there become habit, percolate into your physiology. And this is when we call it as vasana. A lot of these things that we care, we store in terms of vasanas. But then when vasana, we do not correct them, when they go percolated deep into us, and that becomes, vasana itself is a tendency, and then tendency further becomes deeper, and that becomes called as samskara. What is the difference between vasana and samskara? Vasana is still at the superficial level, but then samskara is so deep into the genetic level. This is what we carry life after life after life. My restlessness I carry in the form of samskara. My desire, my anger, my hatred, all these things I can carry as my samskara, deep-rooted principle. So therefore, it is necessary for me to see that I reverse these things. My slavery I give up. I recognize the freedom that's there within me. And all the slavery is something which is aropita. That means to say, from outside that it has been imposed on you. That is what basically it's all about. So, see, Valmiki says to Rama, Vasana dvividha prokta shuddha cha malina tata malina janmano hetuhu shuddha janma vinashini. Now these habits of two types, that's what Valmiki says. There are two types of habits. One type of habit is Shuddha Vasana and the other is the Malina Vasana. That means to say something is pure and the other is impure. What is the difference, pure and impure? Is the impure vasanas are the ones which are responsible for rebirth. Malina janmano hetuhu. The vasanas which are supposed to be the bad, they become addictive to us so much that they cause for our rebirth. Whereas Shuddha Janma Vinashini, Shuddha Vasana is something which takes you beyond the Janma, beyond the birth and life cycle. Or in other words, basically, there is nothing against birth, but being born as a slave is what we shun it. We don't want it. born like a freedom. I have no bondage, I have no axe to grind, I have no particular tendency to move. I'm totally free. And this is what is. And still that I get used to so many things to do the activity, but then they don't bind me. This is what is Shuddha Vasana and Malina Vasana. A very crude example, if you could think of, is Malina Vasana are the things which can become addictive, like the drinks are becoming addictive. Junk food becomes addictive. Why junk food is called a junk food? Because that it will not stop you when you have eaten, but then it tries to increase your appetite. More and more that you go for it. That's what is called a junk food. Try. You don't have to wait for Yoga Vasishtha to tell us. You try that, you can find it. Whereas the same thing, where there are the kind of food which does not become addictive to us. That's what the normal food that we take it is supposed to be the food, which gives you freedom from the hunger. The food is necessary for taking the hunger, and then hunger is taken care of. Look at the animals. They feed their hunger. The food and hunger, they're related. Animals eat only when they're hungry, otherwise they don't eat. They might kill they might kill an animal and then they eat the food as much as the hunger permits. The rest of it leaves for the other predators and goes away. It doesn't even care for that. Whereas the human being is not like that. He becomes addictive. That means he goes on eating and eating and eating. So the kind of food which can become addictive is supposed to be the way. These are called as the Malina Vasana. Whereas Shuddha Vasana are the kind of food which gives you freedom. Once your stomach is full, that becomes like you take water. When you are thirsty, you take water. Water does not become addictive to you. Whereas water is something which is useful as food. And then you eat, drink water. Whereas instead of water that you go for drinking alcohol, then slowly what happens over a period of time, even though you don't have any thirst or anything with that, you feel like taking alcohol, that means it becomes addictive. So therefore, there are two types of vasana that is there, Shuddha Vasana and Malina Vasana. Let's try to work with the Shuddha Vasana. In fact, whatever the culture gives us the practices, activities to do, are supposed to be purifying activities. They are supposed to be Shuddha Vasana. Like the way that we have the whole practice of Yogasanas. They do not become addictive, that then you do these things. The natural food that is come in the culture that is there is supposed to be the sattvic food, which is not the food which can give addiction to you. Whereas the food that is not sattvic is the one which becomes addictive or which becomes enslaves you with that food. So therefore, we take why we people recommend that don't go for junk food, because junk food are the food which can become addictive, and then in turn that it also supplies all the negative things to the body. That's the reason why there is an addiction quality aspect of it that is there. We need to come out of it. So now this is what is Vasishtha gives to Rama, ideas about Vasana. This is what I said earlier, and let me give you from the Shastra itself. Tataha pitaramash mamantriya tirthayatrartha madhyataha nadi tirani punyani vananyatitani cha sadrishyam punaragamya gehena anvaya sukham. Then saluting to his father, intent on pilgrim, in return of pilgrim, he visited the banks of the holy river and forests and resting places. Then he returned again and he lived happily in the house. And then Vishwamitra has come. Etasmin neva kale tu Vishwamitre phyata hritihi tada Dasharatho Raja Padyamartha Nivedya cha. He came and then he was taken care of. And then he says, Tirtha Bhutosi me Brahman Prapya Paramadharmikaha. O sage, having come here, you who are extremely pious and virtuous have become worthy of venerable me. And then Vasishtha, when he asked Ramo Rajivalochana Agata Tirthayatranam Tataha Prakriti Durmama Sarmamevas Esha Moho Ragupate Napadyatyo Napikaragataha Viveka Vairagyotopi Bothayeva Mahodaya. The delusion, a delusion of Rama, is neither due to calamities nor due to passion. This is what I said. Rama's problem is not because of the calamities, not because of the passion. It's only the draw of wisdom, one possessed of the discrimination and dispassion. And then he says that I'm into this dukkhamayam. The life itself is dukkhamayam. That's what is Rama says to Shamyatidam katham dukkham iti tattosmi chintayaha Shrirmune parimohaya sapi nunam shasharmada. How does this sorrow come to an end? How my sorrow comes to an end? I'm burst by this anxiety, O sage. Wealthy only causes delusion and indeed does not confer happiness. Sriman Ajana Nindyascha Shuraschapi Vitakata Samadrishti Prabhutyaiva Durlabha Purusharthatha. The wealthy man is not considerable by people, a valiant man and does not boast, a lord who is of the equal vision. Their three are indeed hard obtained. So these things are very difficult. So I'm burdened by because of this particular. He says that Bharo Avivekinaha Shastram. For somebody who does not know details, then the Shastra, that means to say the knowledge, becomes like a burden. Bharo Jnanam Charaginaha. Somebody who is caught up in the desires and greed for them, this any kind of knowledge is going to become burden of him. Ashantasya manobharo. For somebody who is ashantaha, that means to say there is so much of restlessness within, the mind itself becomes a burden. Bharona atmavido vapuhu. And but same way that for the knowledgeable person, there is the ego. He is the person, it becomes like a burden on us. Ego is the burden. This is what Rama says to him. He gives his ideas very clearly. These are the things which is the burden. The ahankara vashat apat, ahankara and ahankara vashat apat, under the influence of ego, that these sadnesses that apat mean basically the suffering, calamities that arise, ahankara vasat durashreya. Anguish is the one which is born out of desire. Desire arises through control. Ahankara vashat iha and nahankara vashat puroripuhu. These are the two important ideas that are there in the Indian philosophy. One is called as ahankara and the other is asmita. And here we talks about ahankara. We need a good ego. We need a right kind of an ego. The ego which gives us the positive ideas about that. Ego which helps us to grow, become better, knowledgeable. And that's what is one ego which is useful. Other ego is supposed to be the ego which is not only suffering for us, suffering for the others. When you interact with anybody with your wealth, the person will get benefited by that. But the moment that you interact with somebody with your arrogance of your wealth, that only pains him. Similarly, you interact with somebody with your knowledge, that makes somebody clear. Whereas the moment that you interact with somebody with your ego of the knowledge, it pains him. So therefore, we have these two things. Acquiring the knowledge is with the help of asmita. But then when you use the knowledge in the wrong way, it becomes ahankara. This is what Rajagopalacharya said very beautifully. He said, a knowledge which does not bring about humility within you is like the knowledge. A donkey carrying the sandalwood, donkey only knows the weight of the sandalwood, but not the worth of the sandalwood. Knowledge becomes worthwhile only when it does not become our ego. It subsides our ego. Therefore, this is what Rama says to Vasistha saying that how this knowledge how all these things can become without even our knowledge. All these things become like our ego. And that ego actually burns us like the way the candle is burnt. Na prapnoti kvatit kinchit praptairapi bhadhanaihi nanta sampurnamayeti karandakaivambudi. And the mind goes like from one place to another place, like the way that health at filter, without even any particular purpose, like the way the dog runs from distance to distance, from place to place, and all that without any particular aim. And even the wealth acquired by some cases, it does not attain anything, for that it does not fullness of wealth may be there, but then it does not attain anything. It's like the way that the you put the bucket in the water in the well and then take out that with all the holes that are there. By the time that you get it makes all the noise, the bucket that is coming out, particularly into the well, that it comes out with all that noise. But at the same time, water does not come out. So therefore, all these things that required is only going to make a miserable state. That's what it says. Rama says, Kim Shriyaha, Kim Rajyena, Kim Kayena, Kimohito, Dinaihi, Katiparaive, Kalai Sarve, Nikruntati. Of what avail is this wealth? And what avail is of particular kingdom? What is the avail of body and things sought for? Even within certain number of days, everything is gone. Everything goes away. That what is the way that Rama expresses his misery, his suffering. That's where basically the whole Rama's problem, and that's what it gives. The whole life itself is something like dukkha. It is nothing but the suffering that is there. How to come out of that suffering? Life is given to us like the way that objects are given to us without the knowledge behind the object. Then that object becomes like a burden on us. Object can even take away our life, like a nice, wonderful instrument that is there. But if I don't have the knowledge behind it, that object becomes like a burden on me. The same way, such a wonderful life is given in front of us. The whole body is there and the life is there in front of us. Everything is there given to us. But without the knowledge of what this life for, it all becomes suffering. And we go through the suffering every time, finding fault with the others, finding fault with the outside. Only the way that we get the knowledge of the world, knowledge of the suffering, wealth, is coming back to ourself. Self-knowledge, therefore, is very important. The crux of the whole issue. That's why the knowledge of the self is supposed to be supermost knowledge. Knowledge about the world outside we have. The whole world is giving us the knowledge about the objective world outside, but we don't have anything about the knowledge of the self. That's what the discussion of Yoga Vasishtha goes on. So we'll go to the various aspects of it, how in various chapters he deals with that. This is the first chapter about, actually when Rama tells all these ideas to Vishwamitra, Vishwamitra says that your suffering is basically about the essence of life itself, living. Therefore, I will not be able to answer these questions. Only thing is Vasishtha is the right kind of a person to answer that. Therefore, let us go to Vasishtha. That's how Vishwamitra refers Rama to Vasishtha. Vasishtha was his teacher earlier. For so long, he was there in Vasishtha's place along with the whole of other three brothers of him. But in spite of it, at that time, this discussion did not take place because unless until that you are prepared for that, background is not there. Even the best of the teachers will not discuss about that. So therefore, it is necessary to see that you create that background. And that's why Rama and Vasishtha discussion goes on. After Rama comes back from the whole of teaching and then ready to go on his embark on his duty, And that is what the beginning of the Yoga Vasishtha. So with these ideas, let me just stop it here because it becomes too much. Type various ideas separately that I will take it up and discuss with when we go into the details about the Yoga Vasishtha. Thank you so much. I'll leave it for questions.
Thank you, Raghuramji. I think I can't imagine anyone else giving such a concise overview of the Yoga Vasishtha text. The original text, as you mentioned, is about 29,000 verses, and even the shortened version is about 6,000 verses.
Yeah.
I think that's the reason why many people don't want to touch it, because of its sheer volume. And I think this was a very brief overview of the entire text. So thank you very much once again. While we look forward to the questions of all our friends, maybe I'll start with this question. Whether we look into Gita or the Yoga Vasishtha text,
Yeah.
in both places or in many aspects, within our life also, we see the pain, suffering, or depression. I mean, that becomes a powerful cause from something very meaningful emerges out of it.
Right.
What is the importance of suffering or pain in this context? Why is that used as a tool for something beautiful like Yoga Vasishtha to flow out of it? So, what are your insights on?
Uh, um, the inquiry does not start as long as that. I mean, there are. I don't say it will not start, but large number of cases that it is a suffering when people start looking for an inquiry about solution, especially this kind of solution. What happened in this particular land is that in the beginning that man thought that his suffering is because of the outside, so naturally, especially in the western world, that the nature was against them and animals or the forests were against them, so they had to fight against everything in the world outside. So they have invented a lot of things. They questioned and they tried to find a solution for all of those things in the world outside, and they continue to do that today. All the technology development, all the science development is purely for providing us the comfort and then happiness to the man. That is the way the whole thing has developed. Whereas, unfortunately for Indian conditions, that most of the part of India, that the nature is so comfortable for us that everything becomes so easy. And just you live under a tree, that the tree provides you fruit, food, and shelter, and this and that, and then the nature is never against you. So whether it is a summer or the winter or monsoon, that you are comfortable. So naturally, when all these things are there, then also that man finds that there is suffering. And the suffering is basically, it is not because of the physical level, but it's because of the mind. Because somebody says something, something happens, and or somebody has it, he doesn't have it. All these things in the world outside, when you start comparing it, you see that the suffering emerges from your mind. And he can't find a solution in the world outside. So naturally, it is this suffering which gives rise to the question of spirituality. This is basically the idea. But extended this suffering, some people have curiosity about life. But then ordinary curiosity is not going to give suffering. But curiosity of the nature that that's why it is said that when the question becomes quest, then the suffering starts. Then you are almost suffocated without an answer. When such a thing comes up, then spirituality starts. Like, for example, in the case of Buddha, and the question of what happens after death, it was not a question. For all others, it was just a question, passing reference. Whereas for Buddha, it was a quest. It almost like debilitated him. The same thing about Vivekananda. Does God exist? Was for anybody it is a mere question, but for him, It was like a quest. It almost like paralyzed him. And his students who were there along with him when he was in the school, he had that question. Does really God, has anybody seen God? This question was there. They thought, what is this person? Why did he become like this? He was such a wonderful child, nice student, brilliant student. Something really wrong happened to him. They misunderstood him. So this quest and similar thing about who am I? It may be an ordinary simple inquiry, but for Ramana Maharshi, it was not a question, it was a quest. So that is the level when they go into, then the spiritual journey starts.
I think that was very beautifully summarized, Raghuramji. You said, moving from question to quest. I think
Right.
this is the sutra for our day that we'll have to ponder and move towards that. Beautiful. While there are a couple of questions coming in, maybe I'll just also ask you this one. In the Yoga Vasishtha's text, in fact, you refer to that verse where it makes it very clear as to who is the adhikari, the person who is eligible. Aham baddhaha muktaha syam.
Yes.
So one who is not completely ignorant, nor one who is completely knowledgeable. So
Yes.
he is the adhikari here.
Yes.
I think this is something which needs a little more light, and we would like to seek your experience. Because there's the other question that we often come across is, if I'm happy the way life is going on, should I get into spirituality? Of what use is spirituality or all these practices, teaching is of importance to me if I'm generally happy with the way I am? So this is the other question that we come across. So I think Yoga Vasishtha is pointing towards it, something. Yeah.
Very, very nice question that you asked. Actually, I know somebody, my close, I was in this cancer ward. Somebody is suffering actually another 2-3 days, terminal cancer. But somebody next, some ward, somebody died of cancer. And then people are crying. And then these people say, oh, poor fellow died. You're on the way. But then somehow what happens is that we are constantly covered by a veil saying that I will be all right. I am okay. The way that the conditions are there, I can take care of myself. I don't have to do something extra. A person who is assured of that way, what we call it as Vastusthiti, the situation, then you never go for any journey. Whereas a person who's the one who says that, no, I can also go for that. This is an urge that comes from within, so strong. And such a person seeks that. Aham bandhaha, and also I can also be moksha. Moksha is there. But then that you need to make a journey. That's why when Vivekananda said that, I give my talk and usually each soul is potentially divine. He gave such an extraordinary, wonderful statement saying that, look, you are nothing, you are not a sinner, you are also a divine. But then there is one subtle way he used it. Potentially divine. That means you have to manifest. That means the onus of responsibility of manifesting the divinity is within you. When do you make that journey? Will you make it early or you will wait for another 10 janmas? That's up to you. So that way it is assurance, but at the same time, it's giving you an idea to see that, yes, now start this journey. Arise awake. That is the idea. Come in.
So yeah, I'll also take up questions.
Can you read some questions for
me?
I'll
do that. Yeah. So I have a question from Alina Filonenko, who's asking, Pranam, respectful sir. My question is about mind and Maya. For what Lord create all this drama which we are playing here, and if we can just be with him in the highest dimension, happy altogether, why we have to come here and be covered with Maya and mind? I think it's a beautiful question.
See, mind is in between. Mind is in between. Maya is on the other side. On the other side is the self. Mind is in between. Maya is on one side and the self is on the other side. Now, it's up to us to see that we identify with the Maya or we identify with the self. Or it's up to us to see that how much I identify with the Maya, it's absolutely minimum necessary, and how much I identify myself with the self. And what is this mind which has taken you towards Maya? The same mind which can take you back to yourself. This is what also Patanjali gives us a sutra saying that and another thing is that objective world is there. The Maya is the connection between you and the objective world beyond its utility. That means to say basically that I need food for the sake of hunger. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, he gives that beautiful idea saying, hunger is the food, this is the way that duality is set in. So that the idea is that you put the hunger and then food together. What happens with us is we don't put the hunger and food together. We also put food for desire. Then it becomes vasana. If you don't put it that way, it's just for the sake of only absolute necessary. Then you don't get involved in the Maya. Then you are blissful. You are one with the self. Look at the animals. They don't abuse their hunger. They eat as much as their hunger permits. Afterwards, the tiger might kill an antelope, something like that. As long as the hunger permits it, and the rest of it leaves it for the other predators, and then they eat. The tiger is not bothered. Whereas if we would have taken it, no, we have to finish that whole because I killed it. So many other factors I come into the picture and then we abuse it. So necessary to see that you just put the object and the need for the object, only put them together. Don't put the greed behind the object.
I think carrying the doggy bag after eating as much as we required, that is the problem.
Yes.
But I think she's also asking the fundamental question that why did it all start? Like if there's a Maya and we need to go back to the initial situation, why did we slip from that initial situation?
One way it is that we are all born with the amount of innocence and then ignorance. We need to, in the journey of life, we need to cut that ignorance with the help of knowledge. If we don't cut that ignorance with the help of knowledge, then we become caught up into that. That is the reason why we get caught up into that. That's the reason why in our Gurukul system, in Indian system, in the beginning that we were given this knowledge for the first 16, 17, 18 years, the knowledge that what can really help you to cut this Maya, at the background it is given. Later on, any time that you can use it. So this is how this education system has to give that. Otherwise, it is very easy that we can get easily caught up into that Maya. That's what is the power of Maya itself. It is the ignorance. It catches into that. That's why in Ramayana, in Yoga Vasishtha, Rama asks in one place, asked this same question that he asked Vasistha. Why this got into the Maya? He says that, Rama, don't worry about how do you get into the Maya. Esham katam hanmi, how to come out of it. Let us think about that. He says that. Now we know that we are in that, how to come out of it. Esham
I think that was a very helpful answer because sometimes we tend to get into this kind of intellectualization, finding a cognitive answer, which may not happen in all the places.
Yeah.
So what is most important is the operative side of it. Okay, what do I, now that I know, what do I do out of it?
Right.
Okay, I have this question from Prabha Krishna ji, who is asking, you talked about Malina Vasana. I know a person who is not able to come out of smoking addiction. Can you suggest some tips? But I also, the backdrop of this question, I would like to again refer to the whole sequence that you showed to us. It's beautifully. Like I thought that it was filled with psychological insight, the way actually an addiction happens at a physiological level and what it's actually doing. So if you can also take us through the sequence and also have a response to this question, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, the whole of Yoga Vasishtha journey has no sadhana practices at all, but it's all chintan aspect of it. It's all the how you can adjust yourself at the intellect and psychological level. You have to give such a powerful dose of that. If that happens, any amount of addiction you can come out of it. Any amount of addiction. And once you want to come out of that addiction so strongly, in spite of the fact that it is still there, you will find out your own diversions to see that you don't get caught up in that. It's not that one universal solution. Somebody says, okay, let me, recently that I come across somebody like that. He said very clearly, he was into such a terrible addiction, particularly smoking. And then he said that I have decided that I change the company altogether. I will go into the company where this absolutely you do not get it. And says that I might suffer the nicotine withdrawal
Symptoms.
cramps and all those things. But all those things, yes, I cry, I shout, I come to you, I cry. But you just console me, that's all. But don't ask me to go back from this place. I'm here with you. He did like that. There is a strong determination in him. Then he could overcome that. Yes, initially that was a big struggle, but then he could overcome that. And then he found out his own ways of coming out of it by engaging physical activity. You know, he was actually doing the physical work of tilling the land and then spending all the energy in the form of not eating food, emaciating himself, but tilling the land. He said, if I die like this, not by taking smoking. He came out of it.
Tremendous will.
Tremendous willpower.
Yes. I'll move on to the next question. This is
Yeah.
from Dhirendra Doshi ji, who's asked, what is the relation between yoga and karma? Because I know a person, I have seen a person who's doing a lot of yoga, but doing karma, which is harmful to the society and vice versa. So there seems to be some kind of disconnect between these two ideas that he has observed in a person and wants to understand a little more about it.
Actually, one of the aspects of yoga, one of the branches of yoga is the karma yoga. So karma yoga starts with the first principle saying that first step in the karma yoga is to see that I don't do the dushkarma, I do the satkarma. That means whatever that's helpful to the society, I do it. This is what is the idea. The second thing is, I don't know whether that question idea indicates this way that in story of Dharma Vyatha, you get that idea where that he's supposed to be a butcher, he's cutting the meat and selling. And it's from the point of view of violence and killing something looks at as a bad karma, but probably he took it this way that there are some people who eat meat for that selling of the meat is just like a business. I do it, but then beyond that I don't have any attachment. That you purify yourself with that kind of a concept. Maybe that's a way that you can come out of it. Like recently there was one interview about somebody and who has to execute one of the persons who was given a death sentence. They said, how do you do that? They said that I pray to the God that somebody has to do it, so you appointed me this way. But for almost like 5-6 hours, I sit down, meditate, I do all kinds of things, and then I go and do it. That's all. Very simply, I do it. He said that. So, but consciously, you are not engaged in injuring somebody. Dushkarma cannot be done.
I
In
think
fact, in
the
Bhagavad
answer to the
Gita, Krishna also gives another thing, when he gives a sutra called as the Chaturvarnam Maya Srishti, I mean, not Chaturvarnam, he says that Artho Arthati Jignasi Jnana Parachapa Namam Dushkutino Mudaha Prapadyante Maradamaha. That means he says that Dushkruti people that I don't even talk to them, they just let them in. They're there. They have to come out of all those things by going through all kinds of suffering. But Sukritino Janaha, and such people, yes, they may be good people, but then involved in the Artho, Jignasu, Artharthi. They may have Artharthi, they may have Jignasu, all those things are there. Such people that they reach me. Krishna gives that very clear picture.
Thank you. I think the question was about a person who is engaging in not so admirable action, but calls himself to be a yoga practitioner.
Yeah.
And I think you addressed it very well because you said that yoga actually begins when action is done with all good measure and good sense and the good will. So
Yes.
I think, yeah, if that's not happening, then it's not even yoga. It could be asana, it could be something else.
Right.
But definitely not yoga.
Hmm.
So we have a couple of more questions coming from the addiction perspective. So Prabhaji is asking, continuing with that question. So Raghuramji, you're saying we develop or inculcate the quality of tapas or dridha abhyasa to develop that willpower or determination, and then we can direct him to come out of this addiction step by step. Is this right, that what I have understood?
Yes and no also, because basically that we say that how we give him the motivation towards that, that's important. So our job does not stop at that level saying that, okay, you come with determination, then I can help you. It may not work many times. Probably that that's where very often what happens, these are individual cases where, when somebody is addicted to something like smoking or drinking or anything like that, he finds that as a solution to some problem that was that's there behind it. So if we can address that problem, that idea can be made understood, then we can give him the techniques to see that he can come out of it. In which case what happens is that we have already convinced him that dridha sankalpa, that he has to come out of it, that we would have created in him. And after that, then the things will work out all right. So very often, most of these bad habits, I find that they are the solution that they thought for the problem that they already have it. That's a kind of thing. We need to address that.
We have a question related to the same issue, but completely from the other side.
Yeah.
Where Mohana Narayananji is asking, but sir, what if the person is not willing to give up the addiction in spite of knowing its effects? I'm talking about the object taking complete control of him and not the other way around. Would we then attribute it to his karma or something deeper? So can we just be happy saying that it is his karma?
There are two things about it. One thing is that you are looking at only one life. Whereas we say that a strong message that you give it to him may not work in this life, but it might work in the next life, life after life. So a good suggestion, good help that we give always goes with somebody life after life. We have to have that kind of a approach towards everything that is there, not just only about bad habits. Even the people who are doing all kinds of bad activities also, make them to see that they come across something which is good, something which is valuable and all that. So that if not in this life, next life. That's why we always have this idea of reforming somebody. That's what is siksha. And if you cannot reform, then we'll put him in a new situation that he will come back in the next life, in a new environment, maybe that he will become a better human being, better individual if we're given the background behind it.
In fact, I'm reminded of the verse from the Gita where Krishna says, Nahi kalyanakrit kaschit durgatim tat gacchati.
Yes.
Yeah. So even if it's 1 ounce of goodness that someone is doing, maybe reminding, telling him, so that will definitely have its effect. If not in this life, the afterlife.
Shalpamasyapi dharmasya trayate bhavato bhayat. These two things are there.
So thank you, Raghuram. There's one more question from Shraddhaji, who's joined us from Facebook and is asking, okay, addiction is one side. That could be in some cases. But what we find in ourselves, many of us, most of us, in many times, is that getting attached to people.
Yeah.
So how do we come out of that? That's also sort of an addiction in a way.
Yeah.
And we face consequences. So how do we deal with that situation?
See, these are the two important aspects that are there. One is, let me put it this way. We are all born with love. We are all born with compassion. Or we are all born with one, we call it as, in English, we have a word called emotion, but not a very good word. But in Sanskrit, we have an idea called bhava. Bhava is roughly translated emotion. When you look at it, we are born with that emotion called as love and compassion, very naturally that are there within us. Any human being, any animal, that there is compassion, love, these things are there. When you are in, and that is what brings you to the people, or you go to the people, you go to the things that are there because of love, compassion, and third is appreciation. That's what is Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram aspect of it. But then what happens is that the moment that the ego mounts on that, then it should belong to me. Then the attachment comes into the picture. And the moment attachment comes into the picture, so much love is corrupted. We think that love and attachment go together. Actually, attachment is opposite to love. Attachment makes somebody suffocate out of your love. Whereas your love, pure love, is something which does not make somebody to suffocate. So therefore, that we should recognize this attachment aspect is because of two things: is mamatva, aham, ahankara, mamakara. These are the things which brings about that.
Thank you very much, Raghuramji. I think uh, one is we had an overview of the text, and also we could see how the text is useful in many aspects of our day-to-day life, whether to deal with relationships, as we just saw, or in cases of therapy, healing, dealing with situations like addictions. I think this is actually the practical dimension to this text, with such deep psychological insights that is available there.
Right. And I see parallel. I was telling about the parallel between Patanjali Yoga Sutras and Yoga Vasishtha. Both these things use this idea of Abhyasa Vairagya. These are the two methods that you take. Here also, Yogam cha, Jnanam cha, like that, two methods by which that you come out. And then he also gives us another important thing is number of sutras that he has given, how you have to control the prana aspect of it, which is another thing which Yoga Vasishtha specializes in. Pranaspande nirudhyate. That is the idea he has given. So these are the extraordinary contributions of Yoga Vasishtha as a text for the sadhana of yoga.
So, Raghuramji, I had missed one question. Let me just go back to it. So that will be our last question of the session. Namaskaram, Raghuramji. I was so much tranquil to hear your talk. I think all of our participants would agree on this statement. It felt like your peace was emanating from every word you spoke. Much gratitude to you, sir. So the question comes, I have heard many people having questions about reincarnation and the reasons behind and in front of it. These people, I mean, especially those who come from cultures which do not necessarily have these ideas. So these people come from cultures from other situations, countries, and religious background.
Yeah.
How can we make answers available to them from our texts and traditions? Not necessarily to convince them, but at least to show that some direction for their questions to become a quest. So, how important is this even to let someone understand and appreciate the concept of reincarnation?
It's very, it gives a solution for a lot of things, in the sense that when the numbering was linear, that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and all that, we have introduced 0. 0 gave a rebirth to 1, saying that 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Again, we add 0, 21, 22, 23, 24. See, that means to say there is never called as an end to it. That gives an idea. And the nature, when you take it also, that look at the way that day ends in night, and night ends into day, and day ends into night. Season ends into season, and then again into the season. Look at the way where it is not cyclical, where it is not repeating. When everything is repeating like that, why should we assume that only that everything is linear, but everything is repeating, but I'm linear? So with that, one beautiful thing that is there, which Bhagavad Gita 8th chapter gives us very nicely, saying that like the way that the day is the activity, night is the way that we rest, the same way for us, this life that we are is the age of activity, and then we'll be resting in a bigger way, a smaller rest to a bigger rest when we go. And that's all everybody uses, that eternal rest or deeper rest he has gone into, and then comes back again. And comes back again with what all that he has intended to do, and that continues like the way that, in fact, this is what in the Western psychology they say, do the experiment. Strongly think of something before you go into the bed in the night, and then you come up next morning, you see that that thought will be there at the beginning at the first. That shows the night is something like you are into a shell, and come back. So death is a shell, and then life is manifestation.
So I think that was the most beautiful part of this whole discussion, to understand the movement from the linear thought to a cyclic thought.
Right.
Well, the whole nature becomes so full in the cyclic process.
Yes.
And how can man reduce himself to a linear thinking and
Right.
linear approach? I gather this to be the message of this day, Raghuramji. So thank you very much for this profound message. And I also would like to thank all our participants for their participation, for their questions. I'm sure they would wanted to continue it more. But I would like to let you know that we are planning for a whole course on Yoga Vasishtha, and this will be a very unique program which you might not come across in anywhere, because there are very few people who can speak with such authority as you just saw on Yoga Vasishtha, like Raghuramji. So there'll be a course that we are thinking on. It will be offered shortly. So do stay in touch with us. Follow our activities on our website, on our Indica Yoga YouTube channel, and also on our Facebook page. The talk that we heard is something that we would want to go back to it again and again. There were at least 4 to 5 very deep insights embedded in the presentation that Raghuramji did. So these are definitely these places where we want to spend some time to reflect and to understand how beautifully he had explained. So all these videos will be available on Indica Yoga YouTube channel. So please make use of it. And with this, I once again thank all of you and thank Raghuramji profoundly for his sharing, for his generous sharing. Thank you, Raghuramji.
Thank you.
Yes, again, people are asking about the Facebook page. It is Indica Yoga. Indica Yoga Facebook page. Indicayoga.com is our website. And you can look for Indica Yoga on YouTube channels, where you find all our videos. We have more than 200 videos available there of different events. And each video carries the essence like the one that we just saw. Thank you. Namaste.